Yes, first disclaimer, I'm not officially representing LinkedIn, will not comment on LinkedIn specific questions, but I do want to share my personal and professional experience and give some general advice in what I believe happening in the industry. So, what we're going to talk about today. There are three things which I want to talk about. When we develop and we want to develop profitable generative AI solutions, we first need to think about the type of use cases which are ripe for generative AI. We need to understand what they are. Sorry, it's break.
Yeah, just turn it on.
Was it breaking? Is it better? Can someone give me a feedback? Okay, sorry for this. Cool. All right. So we need to do three things basically when we develop a generative AI product. One is to understand the type of use cases where it's makes sense the most to implement. Two, like I said during the panel discussion, I would recommend to start thinking about the cost very early on and not waiting about the implementation stage. And finally, we're going to talk about how to choose the right business model and how to make the whole business profitable. Right, so let's start from the first point on defining use case and values. Like I said, if you have an established company, the best thing to do is to review all the things that your customers do today. It can be external customers, it can be internal customers, but ideally you want to start with a problem space where you know what jobs to be done are there for your company. And the first type of things that generative AI can help you with is to make something faster. So go through the use cases and think about what type of jobs can you make 10x faster. And I'm calling here 10x. It should feel at least order of magnitude faster than any existing workflows that your customers have today. Because they need a reason to switch. And also, it should be ideally high volume task, right? If it's something that your customers do sporadically and you make it faster, it's kind of nice, but it's going to be very constrained use case. And you want to find something very repetitive, very high volume. Let's try to involve, be a little bit more interactive. What do you think will be a high volume use case, for example, at LinkedIn, that generative AI can help with? Any guesses? Customer service, yes. Where do you think exactly in customer service? So replying to people. Yes, indeed. That can be one of the prime ways how you can. People ask LinkedIn all the time. Right now they go to help articles, but instead they can chat with AI and it can direct them to the right source. Oh, more guesses? Yeah. In chat, what do you mean? Yes, but I want to be very careful here, right? The high volume structured task, I think structured is an important point here. If you do something that requires, how do I say, it's a lot of context that you might not even have, that might be somewhat challenging. It's very hard to reply to every message and know all the context of the conversation and do it reliably and do it faster. A lot of time people gonna reply to the email faster than generative AI can help. But if you think about the opening message, that's a great use case. People write their templates. Instead of template, you can create and use generative AI. There are also high structured tasks that you can make much cheaper that right now are expensive. So they don't necessarily need to be extremely high volume. In fact, the whole idea is that something right now can be prohibitively expensive and you can make it, and I'm calling here 100 times cheaper with generative AI, and make it close in quality. Of course, it might not be, you know, exactly comparable, but it should be pretty close. So let's think maybe some of the examples of, and it's not necessarily something that customers paying money to you, but rather something that your customers do with your product, and they paying money to someone else, maybe to some professionals to do certain things. Any ideas what it can be on LinkedIn, for example? Recruiting, like what exactly about recruiting? Right? Like what's expensive there? Yeah, the time spent is a great use case. I would call it more like, you know, automating and making something faster rather than making something cheaper. We're going to touch on some topics, what I mean later on what I mean by doing it cheaper. But when you do something cheaper, think about not only it should be like 10x, it should be much, much cheaper, because generative AI is, like a lot of you know, it's not as consistent and as reliable as if you, you know, hire a human to do certain jobs. And then this is what I call the target zone. So go through the list of things that your customers already do. Think about the things that you can make faster. Think about the things that you can make 100 times cheaper. There's also what I call a danger zone. And it tasks that your customer can do differently with generative AI. And I actually see a lot of this. People try to be innovative. People try to like implement different solutions, implement chat, for example, in different places. And they say, well, you know, it kind of looks cool and interesting sometimes. But the realities of life are that working on and creating this new type of interfaces, most of the time, you shouldn't expect to be successful. Yes, I know ChatGPT works and they introduce a great model, but a lot of other companies that try to repeat the success of OpenAI, they can't do it. Like users might not like to chat to, like, you know, all the different assistants basically. So be really careful there. I would suggest don't go there if you don't have a practice of first working in the first target zone. Yeah, danger zone. Cool. Let's try to make it a little bit more real with some of the examples. So you can make a high cost thing much cheaper. Some of you might have noticed on your profile the way to rewrite your profile. And right now, a lot of people might not have access to the professionals that do this job, but they still want to rewrite their profile. So it's opening up a lot of value for a lot of people for much lower costs. Things that you can make faster, I think, where you talked about this example, when you create a first message and you send to someone, that's a great way to use generative AI as well. Again, not probably like during the all of the conversation, but when you can find a structured way to do it. For example, when job seekers write to recruiters or other way around, you can like know what you need to talk about, and you can automate a lot of that. Finally, there are some interesting products that you can find on LinkedIn website. Talk about this. This is what I call a little bit more experimental, right? It's a new way of how people can consume and create content. Instead of people writing articles, AI can write articles, and then people can comment and add their personal experiences on top of that. And, you know, it's a new form of interaction. It's quite interesting how it will go. Cool. Next, what we're going to talk about once you found your use case is how to think about costs. And first, some example. Let's imagine that you work at a company and you look at the costs of those GPT model. They look great. It's fraction of a cent for 3.5 turbo and a few cents for GPT-4. You know, looks like a great deal, looks pretty cheap. But then, when you look at the number of customers that you have, let's imagine you have 1 million customers. You know, seems quite a lot, but if you're paying just a few cents, still looks fine. But then start thinking, you know, how it's gonna, in terms of tokens, right? Like, because you're gonna pay for tokens, not only for requests, and this is slightly simplified pricing from OpenAI, and you can see that the number of tokens astronomically high, right? So the cost is super low, but it's, I think, trillions, right? Like 1.8 trillion tokens. It's not a lot of times I talk about trillions anywhere. So it's a lot of tokens, and they can be very expensive. Very expensive. This is in millions, right? So let's say you have a 1 million audience, and during the year, you can spend from like $3 million to $55 million on this audience. And the question there is, can you really afford it? Like, do you have a plan of actually creating this particular product? And this is really easy to do at the very beginning. And if people can do it too late, then unfortunately they might find that the product that they built, a very nice product that they built using the state-of-the-art model, cannot be scaled just because nobody will have, you know, this type of investments. Or maybe you do, but like you still need to think about this in advance. Why exactly you want to spend this much money? Cool. So let's talk about the right monetization models. I'm going to outline some general principles here of how you can think about this. And on the x-axis, you have the expected usage. On the y-axis, you have cost per use. High and low is sort of like a relative, you know, qualifiers here. And for every organization, they will be different. But based on our previous exercise, you will be able to kind of like look at this and say, you know, like whether it sounds prohibitively expensive or not. And then you can explore, right? Like, even if it's very expensive, it does not necessarily mean that you shouldn't build it. Maybe what it means is that you should change your business model. So let's start from the left quadrant here. If something is really cheap and the cost is really low, then you will need to provide it for free. Most likely your customers will be able to have it for free in some other places. And usually when the expected usage is low, it's something that happens once time, like once, you know, per life cycle of a user, right? We talk how it can compound if it gets used frequently. If it's not get used frequently, you can improve some of your workflows and simplify some of the like customer life during the onboarding, for example. A trickier quadrant is on the top left, when the cost per user is high, but you still expect that there will not be a lot of usage. So, you know, this might be some of the systems where you want to use a state-of-the-art model, right? For example, when you want to generate a profile of a person, you want to use, you know, the highest quality model you can afford. But then, how are you going to monetize it? What might work well is actually just including this as part of you creating like an offer for existing products that you're already selling. Ideally, you know, if you have a subscription, you can say like, if you sign up, you can get this, like, you know, one-time credit for free, and this way you can increase your sales. Of course, you can also just implement pay-per-use model. If, for example, it's really something new that you're developing. I know, for example, Lens app was creating some avatars for people, right? And they, I think they experimented with bots, creating as part of subscription and also charging users like $5 to create their digital avatar. But this is usually not where I recommend to start. Like every pay-per-use model has a lot of friction. If you include it as part of the offer, as part of like ongoing product, it's gonna reduce the friction a little bit and might help you increase your sales more. When the usage is high, but the cost is low, you can improve the value of your existing product, right? So for example, you have something, the costs can still add up, so you might not be able to provide something for free, but in your product, you might have already sort of like contained space of your paying customers, and it can be a nice addition to their daily life. It can improve the value proposition of your product. You can improve retention, and of course, maybe like you can also sell more of this product. The difference with like top left quadrant is that you can provide more credits to people because it's cheaper on like cost per use basis. Monetizing their advertisement is very, very hard. Honestly, I don't know of the use cases where it works well, but I know that Google and Bing are trying. Right, and when it's very expensive, and you can expect a lot of usage, then ideally you want to create a standalone subscription or the sort of like the package that your customer can buy as an add-on. I know that, for example, Office is doing something like this. I think I heard they rolling out, for Microsoft Office, for Generative AI, you can buy additional subscription that costs like, I don't remember how much it costs, but you get the point that it should be something that probably you need to think very, very carefully. And again, like in all of these cases, you can just try to charge user or pay per use, right? But sometimes there are more elegant ways to solve the problem. Okay, going to be the last slide here. Creating AI system, creating products is the process, not a destination. It's not like you create some product, it worked great, like you move to another one. You should expect several things. You should start with external models, right? So this helps you iterate very fast. It helps you build this use case. Test the use case that we talked about in the beginning. Maybe you want to optimize certain things, make them faster, make them cheaper. Starting with external model allow you to actually do it pretty quickly and do the prototype. But once you build this, you also need the process. You need the process because I think like some of the speakers talked about this, people in the industry will expect that the model is going to be better, cheaper, faster, and you need the whole change management process in order to foresee the change to another model. And you can think of the first run as like sort of like the test run, but then you need this process in place. Because a year after implementing something, yeah, it's very likely that you're going to switch to something better or cheaper. And speaking of doing something cheaper, small models, custom trained models, is what I think a lot of companies will end up going for. And they grade from a lot of points, right? Like if you find a certain use case, you can start with a great general model, but then you can create a very custom specific model. It's going to make things cheaper, faster, your data will be more secure, but it's not recommended to start here. But it's a great way to move, from one quadrant to another. And when you think about costs, you can also plan in advance how you get here, right? So for example, even if it's very expensive to use GPT-4, you can say, well, I'm going to try to use GPT-4 and I'm going to switch to the custom model. And then you can do this calculation, again, in advance to see whether the product makes sense business-wise. Cool. That's all. Thank you.